Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. I'm Julie, your host, and I'm so delighted you could join us this week. My intention in doing this show is to provide information, insight, and comfort to people all around the world by helping to answer life's unanswerable questions. And boy, do I have a wonderful show lined up for you guys this week. We've got Diane Ray, movie star Diane Ray, on today, and I think you're going to really enjoy hearing about Diane's story and about all the amazing people she's worked with. The reason why I wanted to have her on is because she's been so instrumental in bringing spirituality to the masses, and you'll see why as we chat over the next hour. And I'm interested to hear your story, Diane. I know all my listeners will be as well, and you are just such a delight that I think everybody's going to have a ball.
Well, thank you for having me. I have to say, I'm a little I'm a little freaked out on Zoom because I'm not used to video, and so I feel like, oh, I should hide my face because radio is such an easier medium, I guess. I'm worried about. I'm very casual today. I'm just wearing my sweatshirt. It's kind of a cold day in San Diego, although I can't complain with the rest of the country.
Baby.
Boo-hoo, right?
Absolutely. Well, I've got my red on because it's National Heart Day today.
I love that. Red's my favorite color.
So I've got red on to, use the colors of the Heart Association. All right. So here's Diane's intro. Diane Ray has been working in radio broadcasting for over 30 years, most of it spent in the Miami market with stops in Austin and San Diego. During that time, Diane has assumed many roles, including on-air talent, writer, director, and producer, among other things. For the past decade, Diane's been working in digital media and online broadcasting as the network radio manager / producer at Hay House Radio and as the director of programming for Unity Online Radio since 2017. In August of 2018, Diane launched her podcast, Be Present, The Diane Ray Show with Unity Online Radio. And I'm honored to say I have been a guest on Diane's show, not once, but twice. So Diane, welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. I'm so delighted that you could join us this week and make time. By the way, I only do this a few times a year, like maybe 3 or 4 times a year, because as you know, my show's a call-in show.
Yes.
And I'm traveling this week, and so we're pre-recording so that we'll have this show to play. So this only happens very rarely each year.
Well, thank you for having me. I feel honored. I hope I can share some good stories.
I'm sure you will. So let's get right into it. What a varied broadcasting career you've had, my girl. Oh my gosh, in lots of genres.
Yes.
And from when I was reading up on you, I got classic rock, news radio, NPR, and what I call woo-woo or spirituality. So
I love
tell
the
us,
woo.
I do too. Tell us how you got into the radio business and what attracted you to it in the first place.
Well, I've always loved music, and that was, I guess, the big attraction. But I'll tell you the genesis, which is kind of funny, was in high school. I worked for a big record store chain called Peaches Records. Mm-hmm. And every night we would say, "Attention, Peaches shoppers, bring your purchases to the front counter. The store is closing." So I would do this every night, and people would say, "Oh, you have a great voice. You should do something with it." And I'm like, okay, well, that kind of planted the seed. And at the time, as I was graduating high school and going into my first year of college, kind of this weird shift happened where I was interested in journalism and newspaper, and that kind of where I thought I would go. And then in my local hometown, I grew up in Miami, Fort Lauderdale. There was a legendary rock station there called WSHE. She's Only Rock and Roll. And they had an amateur hour. And so at the urging of my Peaches friends, they said, "You should do this amateur hour on WSHE." And I did. And I kind of got the bug. So my journalism career took a dive, and I started, trying to forge my way in radio.
Did they hire you after the amateur hour?
No, no, they didn't, unfortunately. But what kind of was the seed that was planted? So what I did was, while I was still at Peaches Records, I went to volunteer. So I did this for free at a community radio station in Miami called WDNA. That was the call letters. And it was in a big warehouse off of Bird Road in Miami. And I would truck in there with my little crate of records. And they said, can you do a jazz show? I'm like, sure, I'll do jazz. Not knowing anything about jazz. But luckily I worked at the record store. So I got all these records for free. And that's kind of how it started. And I started doing this show, and I did drive time jazz with Diane and just playing whatever stuff people gave me. And from there, I kind of got my foot in the door running the board at a real station in Miami called Love 94 at the time. And that was kind of how I got my foot in the door through the back door.
On the jazz, was it Miles Davis jazz, or was it?
It was everything. It was
jazz, or?
Well, it was Miles Davis. It was like whatever stuff that the record reps would come in Peach's Records and go, oh, you're doing a radio show? Here, take this. So it kind of forced me to listen to a lot of music that I never would have listened to previously. And I really began to love jazz. And then at Love 94, it was, smooth jazz, like David Sanborn and stuff like that. So that's how I kind of first got on the air and learned how to run the board and kind of learn the radio biz. And then eventually I did work for WSHE, the station that I did that amateur hour on, and that was a rock station at the time. So yeah, I did jazz, classic rock. I guess you would call WSHE at the time like a regular kind of headbanging rock station. And, that was through the early 90s, continuing on. But it was fun. Radio was fun then.
I got to tell you, I went to a Miles Davis concert, in the 80s. I think. Early 90s, maybe. And it was
interesting
in Palm Springs.
Guy, right?
It was the most bizarre concert I had ever been to in my whole life, because the music was great, but he played with his back to the audience the whole time.
Yes.
I mean, this guy had zero rapport with the audience. He obviously, what I equated him to kind of like, one of those absent-minded professors that's just so focused on their own little world.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, it was bizarre. The music was great, but I had a tough time with the lack of interaction with the audience.
Yeah, he was an interesting guy. I was going to ask you if he even turned around to face the audience, because I had the same experience.
Yeah.
The one time I got to see Miles Davis, which I'm glad that I did get to see him in concert.
Yeah, what an icon in the business, but I wouldn't go to one of his concerts again.
I've heard this. I've heard that about Bob Dylan too. He doesn't interact a lot.
I would imagine that. So, okay, good. All right. I've read that in addition to your on-air roles, you've done everything from editing, writing scripts for shows, managing the taping of programs, to implementing feeds from nationally syndicated programs like NPR.
Yes.
Was there a catalyst that led you to pursue the more managerial / technical side of the business, or did that just develop organically? What was that transition, and how did that come about?
Well, that I guess would kind of develop organically, because like over the years, I would really do whatever I could do at a radio station to get my foot in the door. Oh, you need to write a spot. Okay, I'll learn. I'll do that. And I would try to do it. And luckily, I had a pretty good grasp of, with going to school and eventually, like originally starting in journalism, I could write. But I always call myself a meat and potatoes writer, not like a poet or prose writer. I could crank out commercials and that kind of thing. So I just really learned everything I could in every situation that I was in. And when I got to, then kind of fast forward, when I got to Hay House Radio, they were just launching their online radio platform at the time. And so really everything I had learned over the years and all my years of working in different radio stations, everything kind of came into play at Hay House Radio, because I wrote all the spots. I edited a lot of stuff. I taught myself how to edit on Audacity. I learned how to edit content. I put together radio shows. So really everything that I did in commercial radio up to that point, when we were putting everything together at Hay House Radio, kind of came into play. So yeah, I did everything. I mean, I had help. I definitely don't want to make it sound like it was a one-man band. It certainly wasn't. I mean, at Hay House, I had amazing engineers, and I miss those guys, terribly. They were incredible to work with. And I have a great team of, I have 2 engineers at Unity that helped me as well. But yeah, that was kind of where everything, for the 11 years I was at Hay House, I just did everything that needed to be done.
Well, and that's a classic example, I think, of people getting jobs and they say, yeah, you can do that, right? You're like, yeah. And then you think to yourself, okay, I'll figure it out once I get in there.
Right,
And,
right.
and
Fake it till you make it,
exactly.
sometimes is the way to go, or the way it works. You just kind of get thrown something and you're like, yeah, I'll do that. And you walk out of the meeting like, oh, I don't know how to do that. But you learn and you figure it out,
Right.
and it comes together.
Right. Well, great lead in for my next question, which is, I'm assuming when you first went to work at Hay House, you just said it was 11 years ago, the whole online radio concept was fairly new.
Yes.
And did you have any trepidations about jumping into uncharted waters? And if so, what convinced you to give it a try? I always say we women have golden ovaries, and when we take risks, they talk about brass balls. That guy had brass balls. Boy, he took all these risks. Well, the equivalent for women is golden ovaries. And
I
so
love
I'm
that.
sure it took a lot of golden ovary energy for you to
I may
decide to
steal
go to
that,
work there.
Julie.
You are more than welcome to use it.
I
I've
love
used it
that.
for decades. Yeah.
That's so funny. So I remember this distinctly. So coming from, my radio career years, I had done on air. I was a jock, DJ and all of that. And, so I had done that and I was familiar with that world. But like you were saying, I didn't know what was going on with online radio. And I was especially kind of nervous about talk radio because I had never really done that format. And I remember talking to a friend of mine. First of all of my radio colleagues at the time, over a decade ago, they're like, what are you doing? It's career suicide. No one's listening to radio online, get a gig at another station, that kind of thing. And I'm like, no, I really think this is where things are going. So I took that leap, believing that was really the way to go. And then look at kind of fast forward where we are now. And I remember
So what
talking
year
to,
was this?
I started at Hay House in 2005.
Okay, long time ago.
So I know
15 years ago.
it
Yeah,
doesn't seem like it, but it is now that
I
I
know.
think about it in that context. And I talked to my old friend, and he had worked in talk radio, and his name was John. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. John Ford. I was trying to remember his last name. I said, John, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do talk radio. I'm freaking out. And he goes, oh, radio's radio. You can do this. He goes, just think of the callers as records. I'm like, oh, and like once I made that connection in my head, like, right, like what you would do in planning, well, we're going to play this new song here and then play a familiar song after that, I was able to kind of make that connection. I'm like, oh, right, the callers are the songs or the records. So that I remember making that like little connection in my head. And then I thought, you're right, radio, I can do it. It's a good story. If someone's saying something interesting, if they're learning something, they're going to stick around. So it it made sense after that.
So expand on the colors are like records. I'm not making that connection.
The callers are like records.
Yeah.
Well,
What's that mean?
in music radio, like you would schedule the songs to benefit the station. Like you would schedule a hit song at certain times. You would schedule a new artist to play in between 2 familiar artists so people wouldn't punch out. Like there was kind of a logic and a science to how you would do it. You would play certain songs in drive time or when it was the busier time, when you had the higher traffic. So to me, to think about callers as records, it's like, okay, well, I'm doing a show and then I want to enhance the show with a song or a caller. Like rather than just take any caller as, throwing it out there, you would want to have the caller and you screen it and you go, okay, well, that fits with what we're talking about. So I want that caller, not the other one. Like it made sense to me from like a music scheduling point of view, which I guess he knew that would resonate with me. Like I would understand it.
So most of
Does
us
that
have
make
heard,
sense?
yeah. What's making me think of is most of us have heard Delilah,
Right.
that show that she does at night, and it's all these forlorn, lovesick people
Oh yeah.
calling in, and they want a record for their, boyfriend that's wherever. So is that what she does? Do you think? Is that
Yes,
part of her? That's all her strategy, that she's picking people and she's got songs lined up ahead of time that will correlate with whatever
exactly.
the
Oh yeah,
question
it's all
is?
planned out. She is all planned out to the T. I guarantee it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, but she does a good job of making you think, okay, what song can we play to, help you with your love torn heart and your life,
Right.
that your romantic life that's a mess right now. And it's,
Yeah, to
you know,
enhance that or to make to tell the story, to
yeah.
make it more compelling, she'll plan it out. And I'm sure she screened the caller in the story and picked the most heart-tugging thing she could find. And yeah, it's all very produced and planned.
So it's don't stop thinking about tomorrow, right? To the person
Exactly.
who's having a romantic loss at the time. Okay. All right. So it seems like the Hay House business model was and still is to primarily promote Hay House authors and to
Yes.
sell books, while at the same time informing listeners who pay an annual fee to access the content.
Mhm.
Brilliant from a business standpoint, really,
Yes.
from a marketing standpoint. So obviously, this strategy has been successful for them. And my question, I guess, is that model being emulated by other entities, and does it still work after 15 years of that model, or do you see it changing?
That's an interesting question because it's something that I really considered when I took over the Unity position, and also the fact that Unity is a nonprofit organization and a 501c3. It needed a different approach than the Hay House Radio model, where you're right. Their model is they're selling things. It's a business. Um, so it's kind of two different um, objectives, I guess, in a way.
Mhm.
It's a different, Hay House is definitely a business. And it was always amazed me that people thought otherwise. Like they thought, well, you should give all this stuff away for free. And I'm like, well, these people have to make a living too,
Yeah.
So, but I guess really to answer the question, what I see that's different is, so like 11, 12 years ago, at the beginning with Hay House Radio, the subscription model was still pretty new. I think that that's changing now. I think people have kind of subscription fatigue. How many things are you going to pay for? I already pay for Netflix, Costco, you know, whatever other subscriptions that you have. I mean, how many things do you really want to pay for? So that's where you kind of look at some of the other models, like a lot of podcasters, and we can talk about that too, because that's really been exploding. Um, I
That's one of
just,
my next questions. Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
My
I
next
just wonder
questions.
where the thing I think is interesting. People don't want to pay for what they think they should get for free. Like you're used to turning on the radio and hearing talk shows and things like that and not having to pay for it, but you'll sit through advertising, right? So I'm seeing the podcast model where, advertisers are seeing the growth and how it's exploding. And they're saying, hey, this is a place where I want to put my stuff, where I can reach a very specific targeted audience for what I'm selling and put it in a podcast. So there's a lot of growth in that area. There's a lot of kind of money floating around there. And then there's also some people that are doing the Patreon model where, hey, if you like what I'm doing, give me some money and help me continue to do it. So I think there's going to be a lot more growth in that area as well. I think now the big advertising companies and big media companies are really looking at podcasting and what's happening. iHeartMedia's, which was Clear Channel, a huge owner of radio stations, making big investments into the podcast world.
Mhm.
Um, more and more people are listening to podcasts. It's still kind of in its infancy,
Mhm.
but really growing. So it's like the Wild West. And for me with Unity, and being an old radio person, on the one hand, I still see the value of the connection that you can make with a live radio show and people calling in and interacting with hosts and making that relationship, and I saw that with like the 8 years I worked with Dr. Dyer, people that called his show. I still get emails from people, I remember Wayne told me to write my book and I did, and it changed my life. And so I feel that's really valuable. But then on the other hand, I see people are consuming media differently. Not so many people are able to be in a place at a certain time to make a phone call or interact. They want to get the material on demand. They want to get the shows. Like I don't listen, or I don't watch live television. I DVR everything, or, you know what I mean? So it's interesting to see what's going to happen. I think it's kind of a balance. I still see radio and hosts that can support engagement, and people like calling in, and there's a lot of psychics and intuitives and mediums that people love to have that interaction and get readings and that kind of thing, and that's great. And then there's also, if you have really engaging, great, compelling content, and you don't want to do it live and you want to just produce a podcast, that's really valuable too. So like, honestly, I mean, I've been to conventions and things, and nobody knows what's going to happen. There's no set thing, so I'm doing both.
It's interesting. A couple of thoughts. I hear from people who listen to podcasts that get annoyed when there are commercials on the podcast. And I know some podcasters will put them all up front, or they'll put them all at the end. And I think what I hear people say is that I just fast forward through the commercials. It's like your DVR. I don't want to watch them. And I do the same thing. Now, the Super Bowl was last week, and I watched the commercials because that's always fun during the Super Bowl to see what the commercials are. But I think that's fun. The other thing that's interesting to me, I was on Coast to Coast, which is a nighttime, for those of you listening or watching that aren't familiar with Coast to Coast. It's a nighttime radio show that's just has this amazingly huge following globally. I don't even know what their audience is. You may know, but
yeah,
it's
George Norrie, he's been around for a while and very successful.
Long time, and one of the highest, and it's an iHeart show. To your point, you mentioned that earlier, and it's a talk show, and oh my gosh, those people are just rabid that call into that show. They just, they're opinionated, they get fired up about stuff. He's a master at stirring up the stuff. And, it was just really an interesting, I was on for, I think it was for 3 hours out of the 4. And the emails that I got from people, some of them were snarky, quite frankly. And so I had a girlfriend say, well, how did you respond to those? And I said, it was really easy. Delete.
Right.
I'm not going to respond to that. If you're going to be polite and you have a valid question, I'm going to respond. But if you're going to be nasty about it, I'm not swimming in that. I'm not interested. So I think it's going to be interesting, to your point, to see how it evolves and to see what happens. So how did you get to Hay House? How did that all happen? And how did you have the golden ovary courage to make that leap from regular radio? Because I assume you were living in Florida at the time, and then you moved to San Diego.
Yeah. Well, so there was a couple of some moving around, which happens a lot in radio. But at the time, I was here in San Diego, and I was working for KPBS here in town, which is the local NPR affiliate. And I was doing just on air on the radio. I came from rock radio, and then I started doing support for KPBS comes from listeners like you and the blah, blah, blah foundation. So it was a big shift from what I was doing before to, doing that presentation. But I mean, what I learned a lot in working at that NPR station at KPBS was, you had to get in and out at a certain time. You had to connect with that NPR feed at 3330 to the second. There's no blah, blah, blah after that, or they're going to cut you off. You had to learn to be on time. Everything was scheduled. Things had to be read at a certain time. So it taught you that discipline. You had to do that. But anyway, I'm at KPBS, and I'm thinking, my career's over. Here I am reading these boring funders. this sucks. You know, I was feeling sorry for myself, and I would look online and I saw there was an ad that said radio producer, Hay House Radio. And I perked up. I'm like, what is this? You know, and I was familiar with Louise Hay because I had that self-help section of my bookshelf. So I had Wayne on there and Louise and Barbara DeAngelis and, you know, Loving the Wrong Guy or whatever. I mean, I loved reading all of that kind of stuff. So I explored what it was. I'm like, what's going on? And so I badgered them, and it was perfect timing because they were just launching the online radio network. So I was able to kind of step in. I'm like, well, I have radio experience, because no one there had really had quote radio experience at the time.
I wonder if very many people applied for the job.
I don't know, maybe.
That would be interesting, because
sure.
it was so out of the box. It was such a new adventure.
Yeah. It was interesting. It definitely piqued my interest because I thought, oh, online radio, what's going on here? Mm-hmm. And the woman that had launched it and was running at the time, her name's Summer McStravick. And she's a teacher now in her own right. And she does online seminars and courses and all this. And so she brought me in, and that was kind of the beginning. And that was right when they were just launching the whole format. They had just built the studios and were getting shows on the air. And I have to give, you know, Reed Tracy he had the foresight to see, you know, what it could be. But then even now, so now recently they just wrapped up their live radio presentation and they're just producing podcasts. So now things are moving and evolving in a different way.
Right. Well, my buddy Chris Northrup isn't even doing a show anymore.
Yeah.
She's just stopped. She said, I did it for 10 years and I don't want to do it anymore. I said, well, that works.
Yeah.
Whatever works for you.
I mean, I get, you know, it's a lot of work, and I've seen people will go into it. Oh, I want to do a podcast, or, you know, oh, I can be a host. And not that you can't learn it or you couldn't do it, but people, you know, when they see that it is really a lot of work, then sometimes people will just say, forget it. Like,
it is a lot of work.
Done.
I can tell you, even with my call-in show, there's a lot of work that goes into that before mm-hmm. and after. And writing my blog, I mean, I spend a couple of hours a week doing that, putting that together, doing the research, doing stuff like that, in addition to all the other stuff I do. So I can attest to that is true.
Yeah.
Excuse me, that it is work. And I would think, well, like for this, I prepared questions, and there's a lot of thought and energy that goes into it.
Right.
Okay. Let's see what I got next for you. Okay. So I've got, back to the question about, are there other entities that have emulated the Hay House model? I think of Glenn Beck and some of those guys that are doing the subscription model, and they are making a fortune doing that in talk radio politically.
Yes.
The political genre, obviously, but are there other entities that you can think of that have been successful? It seems to me like Hay House really stands out in the bunch.
I think there might be individual hosts that have built up their crowd, you know, up to a point that they're able to make a living, you know, and kind of sustain that. I think it's interesting where now, like I remember back, like, you know, when I started in radio, even in the very beginning, when I was answering the request lines at Y100, this big top 40 in Miami. I was 19 years old. And at that time, it seemed the strategy was, let's just get as many people, you know, cast the net, get as many people as you can. That's it. We want to be number one. We want to rule the world. But now it's like, I think people are trying to find their crowd and get their niche, you know, so it's more like super serving those people that are going to be into you and not worrying about casting the net and getting everybody else, because they don't care anyway. You know what I mean? Like, you have to kind of serve the people that you know are really going to be into you and bring more of those people in than try to please everybody. So I think that's kind of a big difference, for at least from then until now.
I agree. There's a psychiatrist who's got so much alphabet soup at the end of her name, named Kelly Brogan. Do you know Kelly, or know of her perhaps?
I've heard of the name.
And she said to me a couple of years ago, because she has all the Ivy League degrees and worked at trying to get her what she had found in her practice and the research that she had done that went against typical psychiatric methods of treating patients. And she said to me something really profound, and that was, don't try and convince people of what you do, because the people that are attracted to you are going to find you, and it's a total waste of time, to your point, to try and convince, academia or somebody that medical intuition is a real thing. She said the people who are willing to work with you are going to be the people that you need to spend your time with and focus on. And that sounds so basic, but it was so profound for me, because I'm an inventor and an entrepreneur. So my whole career has been dreaming up stuff and then figuring out how to market it and how to sell it to people. So in this situation that I'm doing now, this adventure, I'm just allowing it to unfold naturally. And people say to me, well, what do you do with the skeptics? And I said, I really don't have hardly any. And if I get one, I'll say, and somebody will say, well, I'm really skeptical. I said, well, that's appropriate. And every once in a while, very rarely, I'll have somebody say, well, you need to convince me. And I'll say, no, I really don't. If you're interested in this, fine. If you're not, that's fine too. That's your prerogative. I don't really care.
Right.
I'm nice about it, but
Yeah.
but I don't need to convince anybody. I know what I know. If it's something you're interested in, great. If it's not, great. Good luck with whatever you're interested in.
Right.
So,
And you can see the results. And then if someone comes to you and they have an open mind, I've talked to so many people over the years and have been blown away by some and not so much by others. And I've seen things that I cannot explain. And, but personally, I'm interested in all of it. And that's why it was just such great fortune for me that I was able to have that experience of, working at Hay House at that particular time, right when they were launching the network. So I could take all of my radio expertise and then apply it into something that I was so interested in myself. So that was really a gift there. I learned so much.
My friend Brandon Beecham, I love this phrase that he either came up with or he stole it from somebody. If you stole it from somebody, I don't know who he got it, where he got it, but he says life is the crossroads of destiny and free will. That we have a destiny that we want to explore, which I agree. It's kind of like a basic script. And then there are a bazillion ways that you could explore it. To your point, you were interested in the spiritual side of the equation and you were interested in radio, and it was the cross where they crossed, both of those different roads. So how wonderful.
That's so true. I like that destiny
and free will.
Because I wondered, maybe I didn't consciously think of it, but you wonder, like in radio, I had so much fun, doing rock radio, and, you got to go to the Stones concert and get free stuff, and it was all fun. But how long was I going to be able to be, talking about Guns N' Roses or whatever and really care about it? The older you get, you change, you have different interests, you change. And I was always interested in, spirituality and metaphysics and all of that. Like I was the kid that had the tarot cards at the slumber party, and that kind of thing, and loved ghost stories. So I think I always had that interest, and then I was able to really explore it in a much bigger way, right. And still continue to be interested. And I get to talk to cool people like you. It's great.
Oh, thanks. It's an honor to get to talk to you. I feel like I'm in the, in the presence of the guru of this medium, because you really are. You helped create this medium, especially in this niche. So that leads into, I've recently read there are upwards of 850,000 podcasts. I was amazed at that number. And so my question is, has the advent and availability of multitudes of free podcasts changed the radio broadcasting online subscription landscape? And how's this phenomenon affecting the way people get information and, for that matter, entertained? We touched on that a little bit earlier, but I think it's going to go forward. I don't see any stopping it, because we're all busy. If we can get it on demand, Why wouldn't
Right.
we? And if
Right.
it's free, why wouldn't we take advantage of that? So do you have any thoughts on that to expand more on what you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier?
I mean, I think what's going to happen, and I've already heard kind of some rumblings on this, is that you're right. Like there's 800,000 podcasts out there. Everybody and their brother has a podcast. Should they? Maybe not. That's another story. But on the other hand, look, you're free to do, you have that freedom, right? So it's kind of putting that capability into anybody's hands. There's nothing, no one's stopping anybody from doing a podcast. But that said, yeah, there's a glut of stuff out there. 800,000, and I think I read something like, 3,000 a week or keep coming on. So
Wow.
what is going to be changing is the way you find it, right? That's why having a platform like Unity is so great, where people want you to curate this stuff for them. So all the people that are interested in spirituality or metaphysics are going to be looking for places to go to find it. And, Google is going to be launching a bigger search capabilities specifically for podcasts. So really the next step, I think, is the ability to find it and to curate it for people that have whatever you're interested in, sports, spirituality, or whatever. So making that easier for people to get the content. And I still think there's a company out there called Luminary. I don't know if you've seen the ads. It's a pay per podcast subscription model. And just every time I click on their ads on Facebook, I just see a lot of negativity, where people are like, I'm not going to pay. There's so much great free stuff out here. Why should I pay you? Now, you might want to pay if you want them to gather that stuff for you, or they have a host that you really like. But I think that there's still a lot of resistance for any more subscriptions. So I don't know. We'll see. If it's something that, I guess it was something I really wanted, I would pay for it, or something really special. Like here's an exclusive Obama thing, or, some luminary or big star that you wouldn't get anywhere else. If there was exclusivity, maybe you would pay.
Right.
So I don't know. I think everyone's trying to figure that out, what the next step is going to be. But definitely podcasting isn't going anywhere. In fact, it's growing even more. On-demand content, people want more and more of it. And the big media companies are aware of it, and they're taking steps to.
Well, and I think content too is it's gonna filter through with what people want. I think a great example is we're just coming off of the impeachment nonsense that went on in Washington last week, and Ted Cruz launched a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and his podcast went to #1 immediately. I mean, immediately, like within a couple of days. And so I thought that was really interesting how that was something people were interested in. It was a 20-minute, 30-minute show. It was concise. Here's what happened. Boom, 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 boom. And I thought that was really an interesting phenomenon that happened. It'll be also interesting to see if he keeps having that big audience now that that impeachment thing is over, and see how
Right.
he retains his audience.
And Rudy Giuliani started a podcast too. I
That's
have
right.
not heard it.
I haven't heard it either. I've heard Cruz's. It's good. It's
Is
very
it? It's
good. Yeah,
interesting.
it's really well done. He had Lindsey Graham on, I guess it was last Friday, and I listened to that. And Lindsey Graham's just, he's such a policy wonk, and he was hilarious. I was laughing my head off. I had no idea.
I'll
He
have to
could be
listen.
a stand-up comedian. It was hilarious. Hilarious, the whole thing.
That's so funny.
And
I think
had good.
also the level of people are gonna have to present decent sounding audio. It's got to be a well put together show. At least decent sounding audio. People don't have to listen to some really inferior product anymore, because there's so much great content out there.
Right. All right. So bottom line, you've worked with some of the giants in the mind, body, spirit space. Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay, Christiane Northrup, Carolyn Myss, James Van Praagh, to name a Prague. Is that how you pronounce the name?
James Van Praagh.
Mom Prague, to name a few. So what stands out about your interactions with these icons? And are there any stories you can share that deeply touched you and perhaps even changed your life? Obviously, you mentioned earlier you worked with Wayne Dyer for 8 years.
Yes.
My goodness, that's like sitting with a saint for 8 years, as far as the information that he taught all of us. And it sounds like still is teaching us from the grave in some respects.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how people still like to hear those old shows with Wayne. And gosh, I could think of how much I learned over that time. And I'm so grateful that I had that experience of being able to work with him and Louise. And first, I guess I'll start with Louise, because almost daily, and I was talking to a colleague I had interviewed on my show just this week, Nancy Levin, and she was the event director at Hay House for 12 years, like the whole time that I was there. So we worked together. And I said to Nancy, daily I say to myself, how did Louise do it? How did she start that company in her 60s and not go crazy? How? Like, I marvel. I wish I could ask her again. And I remember I did ask her that. I said, Louise, how did you do this? And she said, you know what I do? I answer the phone and I open the mail. I said, that's how you started the company? She's like, yes. I answered the phone, I opened the mail. So basically, you do your tasks every day, and you keep your vision and you keep going forward. And yeah, you're going to go crazy and all this stuff's going to come at you and challenges and everything. But she just did what she had to do every day. But I marvel that, she had no, real schooling. She was a high school dropout, got divorced and got into the science of mind movement. And that's kind of how she started teaching. But like, how did you do it, Louise? So I learned she was very inspiring to me. And in my interactions with her around the office, I mean, she did walk the walk. She was not phony. I remember one time I was limping. I had this back issue at the time, and I'm like, well, I'm pushing my way through the office. I'm going to do my job, and I'm limping along. And she goes, you're not being supported. You don't feel supported. That's why you're having back issues. Do this affirmation. And I thought about it. I'm like, you're right. I don't feel supported. I don't know if that's what started it, but she walked the walk. That's the best way I could describe it. She really did believe in what you think and how you speak. And even she would say things, if you said something like, I think there was a meeting and someone said, kill two birds with one stone. She'd say, well, why do you want to do that? Don't say that. Or one time I said, oh, I'm dying to see that. No, you're not dying. I mean, she would always notice things like that, just in conversation. She would call you on how you thought about yourself and the way you said it. So
the languaging of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she really believed that, and she was really, she was so sweet, and she loved gardening and her roses and things like that. And just a beautiful person, a great teacher. I loved her a lot.
And then how about Dyer? My gosh, he's kind of like the godfather of a lot of this for many of us. That
the father of motivation.
Well,
that's what they would call him, the father of motivation.
Yeah, and the father of, I found that he introduced a whole lot of concepts about, like, talking to St. Francis of Assisi all the time, and talked about it in his books and talked about it in his specials on PBS. And it was just like somebody talking about, some business thing. It was just very matter of fact and I talked to St. Francis all the time, and this is what he told me. He called him Francesco, and this is what he told me, and this is what I'm doing. And I think he really helped bridge that. It makes me think of Harry Potter, the name that will go unmentioned for Voldemort or whatever they say in Harry Potter, but he bridged that, going from the talking to spirits and getting inspiration and following that and all of that, and just talked about it matter-of-factly, and had that doctorate as well, which I think gave him some credibility that somebody who grew up chanting under a crystal in a yurk maybe wouldn't necessarily have.
Well, what I noticed with Wayne that I thought was so great was if you looked at his career, kind of the trajectory, like all of his books, you know, as he got older and moved through his own journey and experience, he became more interested in spirit and, you know, and talking about those kind of things. And he wasn't afraid of it. Like he said, you know, he would say he talked to St. Francis and had those kind of experiences, and he would share it with people. So he was so authentic, and he shared parts of himself, you know, his not so proud moments. I mean, he talked about a lot of things on his radio show, you know, drinking, other incidents in his life. You know, he was very honest. And I think that's what really resonated with people. Like they could see parts of themselves in things that he had been through. And he loved people. I mean, and he loved to do that show. He didn't have to. I mean, it was Wayne Dyer. He didn't have to do an online radio show every Monday, but he really loved it. He enjoyed talking with people. And you know, there was many times he was very generous. Like on the show, if someone would call in, oh, I really want to come and see you. You know, I'm broke. I lost my job. Many times he would buy people tickets to go to his events. You know, here, take that person's name and I'm going to pay for this. And he did that many times. Mm-hmm. So he was just a good guy. And he was very funny. I don't know if people would know that about him, but he would make jokes, you know, sometimes really off color, you know, like in between the callers, if we had a break, you know, he would, because we had this interesting relationship where, you know, he was in Maui and I was here in San Diego. So I kind of felt like I was his second banana, like his Ed McMahon in a sense, because I would bring on the callers and then just kind of step aside, like they don't want to talk to me, they want to talk to you. So I got to just listen to his interaction and how he talked to people. But it was the highlight of my week. Like every Monday I would really look forward to that interaction, because I would just sit back and listen to what he's telling people.
Oh, yeah.
And then I would share it. Like I'd be at a party or out with the girls or something, and I'm like, you know, Wayne said this. It's like, you know, so I would share, you know, information, whatever I happened to learn that week. But he was very passionate about telling people, look, don't live halfway, you know, follow your heart, do what you want to do. You know, no excuses. Like he said that in the book, excuses be gone. So he was passionate about people living their best lives. He really wanted that. So he was amazing.
I bet. Gosh, I tease people saying you're getting an executive MBA on the street. You got an executive PhD by being his cohort on that show. It sounds like,
and just listening in. And then and also I'd like to share too. I won't say what names, but I think sometimes people will tend to put a teacher or somebody on a pedestal as a guru and not see them as human beings. And these people were fallible and had flaws just like the rest of us. And, you know, there were some hosts that I work with, like one who I won't say, left their microphone on during the show and berated their assistant at the time. And I thought, oh no, I listened for a couple of seconds and I realized what was happening and I kind of pulled it down so I wouldn't hear it. But I thought, oh, if people saw that side, they might not, you know, I don't know, maybe they wouldn't think the same way, but I guess not. And not to say anything negative about that particular person. They were just having that human moment, you know. But I think sometimes people will put someone up on a pedestal or think that they're not human when they are. Mm-hmm. Obviously.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Well, certainly I work as a psychic and medical intuitive, and in recent years it's become more accepted. Even the Vatican issued a letter to its bishops a few years ago encouraging them to welcome psychics and healers in their parishes, which was a huge step.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, in 2016. If you go on my Instagram feed at Ask Julie Ryan, you'll see a link to the letter. So from your vantage point, do you see spirituality becoming more mainstream and accessible over the years that you've been in this business?
Oh, that's interesting. I think in some ways it has, but what's kind of disturbing is I think in some other ways, the pendulums we're kind of moving backwards. I think sometimes people are are very strident in their, my view is the right way, and you have to believe this, or you're going to hell, or that kind of thing. Like, I don't like any of that fear-based belief systems. I hope that one great thing that I've learned from Unity is to really see the value and the beauty in the wisdom of all spiritual traditions. I went to an event with Unity 2 years ago called the Parliament of World Religions, and it was over 200 faith traditions in Toronto. And I did interviews there, and I put together like a little 2-part radio show of my experience there. And I spoke to Buddhists, Wiccans, pagans, Native Americans, channelers, Episcopals, everything. And really what I learned when I came away from that was like, you know what? Pick one, whatever speaks to you. I think that that source that Wayne talked about so much is available to all of us, and it's love. And that's what he would say all the time. So like, I don't know. I want everybody, like, we're all one.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of truth in that, but I do think with the availability of information out there that yeah, hopefully people will explore that part of themselves. I think we all have a spiritual nature. I think we're all intuitive, some more than others, like yourself. I think it's a muscle that you can build. I think some
Right.
people are really gifted, like musical ability, but we all have that intuitive ability. I try to tune in and listen to it all the time. And sometimes I get angry if I don't hear that voice, but I know
Right.
it's there. So I try to cultivate that, and you can do that with meditation. And, I won't say I'm a master meditator, I'm working on it, but I try to get quiet and listen, just take a minute, and that source is available to all of us.
Well, when you were talking about the religions at that conference in Toronto, it made me think about my book, Angelic Attendants. And my main spirit guides is dead Pope, Clement VI, who showed up and about 10 years ago, and he said, you just need to teach the world about what happens when people die, because it's been so bastardized, and it's, religions and cultures, and it's just wrong, and people are so afraid, and it's crazy. And I said to him, I'm not doing that. I'm a businesswoman. People are going to think I'm nuts. I'm not doing that. And he's like, yeah, whatever, just go do it. And then I Googled him and found out that he was in office during the bubonic plague, when 2/3 of Europe died, and is
Wow.
best known for his prayers for the dying and his prayers for the dead. I never even heard of a Pope Clement, ever. And I said to him, Pope Clement? I never heard of a Pope Clement. He said, well, I was number 6. So I Googled him, and that's what I found out. And I thought, okay, Ryan, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, really. But the interesting thing that has come about with that book is my church gives it to every family that comes in that's planning a funeral. It's being used in Sunday school classes around the country by all kinds of different religions and denominations, including synagogues. I did not see that coming at all.
Wow, that's great.
And I have so many people say, oh my gosh, that book has helped me get through my whoever's death, my mother, my husband, my whatever. And I have given it as a gift to so many people. I even have people say, I give it as a funeral gift, which sounds really, maudlin and morbid, but they say it just brings so much comfort. So I say the prodding from a dead Pope, and our mutual friend, Katie Coons, who was my editor, she says, you don't want to piss off the Pope, dead or alive.
No,
yeah,
definitely
no
not.
So
She's great.
yeah,
No, I love what you're saying, and I feel really strongly about that as well, because what you're doing is helping to take the fear and demystifying what should be a natural and what could be a beautiful process. But unfortunately, I think in this country, a lot of times it's not. I mean, even with my own mother, when she was going through her transition, I mean, I thought the hospice people were like angels. They tried to make it as easy an experience as possible. And I don't think we should have so much fear around that, so what you're doing is so important.
Well, and my point is it crosses all religious and cultural and educational demographics. It's just universal. Like at that conference that you went to in Toronto, it's the same thing. It's all the same source. It's all the same
Right.
God. It's all the same thing.
That's
So,
exactly it. That was the
yeah.
main thing I took away from, and just it happened to be like some of these people related with the Wiccans and Mother Earth, and they felt that was what resonated with them. And then there was Buddhist and Sikhs, and yeah, it was awesome. It was like a buffet of like
A
all
buffet of
this
psychicness. That's what
great,
I say
yeah.
I do. I'm a buffet of psychicness. So we have a minute left. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me this week and everybody that's
Oh, thank
listening.
you.
Diane has a show on Unity Radio. You tell everybody your website, but take us out with your DJ voice. Like, give us all how people can find out about you, but I want you to do it in your DJ voice.
Okay, I'll try and do it as quickly, succinctly as possible. So join me on Wednesdays, 1 o'clock Pacific, 3 Central, 4 Eastern for Be Present, the Diane Ray Show on unityradio.org.
And how can people find more information about you?
Oh, about me specifically, you can go to my website, which is dianeraymedia.com. You can also find me on Instagram at DianeRay66, on Twitter, DianeRay1, on Facebook, Be Present, the Diane Ray Show. I'm everywhere, but I do hope you give me a listen. I try to share wonderful information from people like Julie and other great teachers and speakers and writers, and whoever I find interesting that strikes me, and I have them on the show. So it's a lot of fun.
Terrific. Well, thanks so much, everybody. I'll be back next week with a live show, and I hope your week is terrific. And Diane, big hugs and kisses. Everybody, lots of love. Take care. Till next time. Bye-bye.